All right, welcome to another lesson. So this lesson is going to be life in geologic time. It's kind of just putting together all of the things that we learned about fossils and relative age of rocks. Um, and I guess I can give you a little information on the absolute dating of rocks too, if you want. So for life in geologic time, geologic time is based on the geologic time scale. And that time scale is based on the approximate age of the Earth, and it's divided up based on life forms and changes in life forms. So we have these major subdivisions, and it goes from the biggest subdivisions to the smallest subdivisions. So it goes from eon to era to period to epoch. And so eons are going to be the largest subdivisions, and within eons we have eras, and within eras we have periods, and within periods we have epochs. And epochs are more like biblical references, so we don't use them quite too often. But here's just a really good example of the geologic time scale. We go from the Hadean period, where this is like the start of the Earth, to the Archean, to the Proterozoic, all the way to the Phanerozoic, and then all the way up to the Quaternary period, which is this is where we're living in right now, is the Quaternary period. So you can see here with the eons, here are three eons: Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic, and then the Phanerozoic eon. That's a really, really long eon. And so the longest era is the Paleozoic era. That may be on your test, so that's something to remember. But really, all you need to know is that these eras are based on changes in life forms. So right here, this period, the Precambrian period, is like before we started seeing like a lot of brain development and that sort of thing. And so then, here is how it's divided up. We got the earliest life forms. These were like single-celled organisms, and then we get this jump in life forms, and so we go to a new era, and that's going to be invertebrates are becoming more common, and then we go up, and we have this Permian mass extinction, and we've got dinosaurs in here. So we're just seeing these changes in life forms, and that's how we're dividing up the time scale, the geologic time scale, is changes in life forms. So when the dinosaurs were extinct, we got a new era. That's the Cenozoic era. So that's just a quick reference for you. And then here's another, just a good little graphic for you to be able to understand the geologic time scale and how eras and eons are split. So these are eons: Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic. These are eras actually. But these are all inside of one eon, these three. So you can go back, see these eons. The Phanerozoic eon makes up these three eras, and we see them right here. Those three eras are the Phanerozoic eon. And so these are also eras and eons at the same time. There just wasn't enough change in life forms to be able to constitute making all these random eras for no reason. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about evolution. So to be a species is to be able to reproduce with another organism, and then that baby has to be fertile. So that baby has to be able to reproduce as well. So when you think about humans, we're a very, very diverse bunch of people. We go all over the world. There's all sorts of different humans, but we are all the same species because we can get together, we can produce an offspring, and then our offspring can produce another offspring. So that's kind of what distinguishes a species. An example of the other side would be like a lion and a tiger can create a liger. That's an actual animal that exists, but it is not its own species because ligers are all infertile. So lions and tigers then are not the same species. We think of that with like horses and donkeys. So horses and donkeys can mate and they can create an offspring. So they can have a baby, and that baby is called a mule. And mules are all infertile. That's a fun fact, but it also shows you that donkeys and horses are different species. So it doesn't matter if you can create an offspring or not, that offspring has to be able to create its own offspring. So then we're going to look at organic evolution and artificial selection. So organic evolution is like basically how everything got here to this point. So we are going to talk about natural selection. It's the main mechanism for evolution. Charles Darwin, I'm sure you have all heard of him. He came up with the idea of natural selection, and it goes into like survival of the fittest. So with biology, fitness is your ability to create offspring. So birds with more colors are usually more fit. It takes more energy to create colorful plumes, so that's just more attractive to the females. They can see that male bird like kind of has his stuff together, so he's able to whatever is going on in the environment. He has a great home. He's able to eat every day, and so he's able to put some of his metabolic energy into creating these beautiful plumes of feathers. So that that bird, the colorful male bird, is going to show that he's more fit than if he was like a drab-colored male bird, and like his feathers were all displaced and they didn't look very healthy. That male is probably not going to breed. So that's what fitness is. So we're going to think about like survival. You have to be able to survive to reproduce. So that's going to be number one. But fitness is really your ability to reproduce and like what you're doing to make it so that you're more attractive to the other side. So another example is like large walruses. They typically have a large harem of smaller female cows, and the larger ones are able to reproduce more often because they can fight other walruses in their area, and so they eventually survive longer because they're able to fight better. And when they're larger, they actually don't get into as many fights because the smaller walruses know to back off. So those large walruses are going to be more fit. And it goes the other way. Sometimes smaller walruses are fit for a certain environment if they can just squeak in, do their thing, and get out of there without getting attacked by the large walrus. Then technically that walrus is also very fit because he's he's getting his genes out into the gene pool. So what we're going to talk about for like a mechanism, a driver for natural selection is an adaptation. Adaptations to the environment are like big things that we talk about with natural selection. So Charles Darwin looked at finches on the Galapagos Island. They look different than the mainland finches, so he suspected that they were a different species. But their adaptations are what made them special and different species. So they have some finches on that island, due to competition for resources, that have very, very large, thick beaks, and so they're able to open up nuts that other finches might not be able to. Then there are some finches that have very, very long, thin beaks, so they're able to get into trees and eat ants in like holes in trees, that type of thing. So those adaptations, due to competition, created the natural selection for a mechanism for evolution for those specific species of finches. So I know that was kind of a lot of information, but this stuff right here is really all you need to know. And then we have artificial selection. This is important. So artificial selection, a really good example of that is cats and dogs. So we have bred cats and dogs over thousands of years for the specific traits that we want. You can think of a pug. A pug is artificially selected to have respiratory problems. So it's not actually that great of a thing for the pug, because we kind of just created this creature that can't breathe very well and has all sorts of problems. They are cute, but they live their life not being able to breathe very properly. And so then another thing that can cause evolution of new species is a divergence. And this is important because one of the main driving factors for divergence is going to be plate tectonics. It could also be like natural disasters, but we're going to think about plate tectonics here, and I'll show you why. So we have Pangea. Pangea was long ago we had all of our continents together, and Pangea is technically one land, so we just had all the land together in one area called Pangea. And so then we had this huge ice cap covering pretty much everything. And so imagine if these arrows are a species. We'll say a camel or something. We'll say a camel. So we have Pangea. We have this one species in this typical environment for this certain camel in this like little icy range. And it's relatively the same latitude and longitude. So they're not going to change that much. Then plate tectonics happen. These continents split apart. Right here, you see that they split apart. And then all of these arrows, which represent a species of camel, get split up. And so these camels are going to diversify over time, changing and adapting to their environment through natural selection. So we'll say right here, we've got a camel, it's in the desert of Africa, so it's got one really large hump. And that hump is used basically for water storage. They put a lot of their energy into water storage, and that's pretty much it. They could just kind of roam around and collect water when they can. And then we go up here, we'll say that this is like in a snow-covered area or something up north. This camel is going to have two humps, and it's going to be more fatty. Since there's ice all over and there's snow and precipitate to get water from, that camel doesn't have to worry as much as this camel for water. So it's going to naturally change over time and adapt to its environment and become its own separate species. And so that's actually how we got the two-humped camel and the one-humped camel, the dromedary and the bacterian camel. It's something like that, where it was a similar species, and then something happened, a divergence happened to where they split up, and then they adapted to their environment and became two separate species. So that's just an interesting thing to know. Like plate tectonics is a driver for divergence, and that's going to be an example of like if you see an animal in 5 different continents, that's going to be because of plate tectonics. And so the last thing we're going to talk about is trilobites. We talked about them a little bit in the relative age of rocks. They're cool because they're index fossils. So they're the first species with a hard exoskeleton. They have a huge fossil record. We still have trilobites to this day. And what I was talking about before is like changes in trilobites. So this trilobite is different than this trilobite. Even though they're the same species, we can tell what the age of a rock layer is due to like the size of its eyeballs, its olfactory nodes, the number of spikes on the side, the number of spikes on the back. This trilobite has changed from this trilobite, so we can generally tell like what time period this rock layer is around the trilobite just from seeing changes in the structure of the fossil of the trilobite. So we can track them to eventually becoming a new species. They're still the same species, but I assume if we had a trilobite from this era try and mate with a trilobite from 200 million years ago, that offspring would not be able to have another offspring, so they would be completely different species at that point. So that's just like 2 examples of why trilobites are nice for science. Because of index fossils, and then also we can see like changes of life forms over time. So they're a really good index fossil for that reason. Okay, so that's going to be all that we're going to talk about with geologic time. Just remember that this is the largest subdivision of geologic time, and then it goes down to this being the smallest subdivision. And remember, plate tectonics kind of spur divergence and spur the ability of one species to be in like 5 different continents and change as well. Okay, so like always, if you have any questions, go ahead and contact me. Let me know if you're not getting something so I can help you out. And I will put supplementary information up if I get a lot of discussion posts that say that we're not quite understanding a certain topic. So you have to let me know. Okay, have a great week.